It's good to be with you this morning. Full disclosure here, as I was writing this sermon, I was on the struggle bus. So the passage I'm going to preach on, I started out really liking, and then I didn't like it so much. And then I came back around to liking it again. And so I hope that what I have for you is coherent enough. There's this, the line in the verse, it was, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter, but it does. What was the song before How Deep the Father's Love? Yet not I, but Christ in me. Check this line out. If I can find it. Oh, it's, can you do it? I don't even know what I'm looking for, but just put it up there. That's right. That's how ill-prepared I am. That's how hard it was to get this message together. All right, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. That's good. Keep going. Keep going. Whoop! Back. Yep. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need his power is displayed. That's why I do this, how I do it. All right, here we go. Sorry, you got to get back to the sermon. You have time. Yep, take your time. What we've been doing in this sermon series is looking at figures in the Bible, and we've been considering their lives and what can we learn about being grounded in God and the gospel so that we're ready to live as lights for him in the world, right? This summer, the guys who have filled in for me, they've really focused on Jesus' miracles. So I want to continue doing that, although today I'm going to focus on a passage that is not technically a miracle account. But there are plenty of miracles in this passage, and we will see them. So here's the passage. Let me read it to you. Luke 7:36 through 50. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. All right, here's the big idea that I hopefully can convey this morning. Christ in me. All right, your ability to love is directly correlated to the amount of forgiveness you believed you have received. Your ability to love is directly correlated to the amount of forgiveness you believe you have received. All right. First, let's consider Simon the Pharisee. Who is this guy, right? He has Jesus over for a meal in his house. Who is Simon the Pharisee? Well, Pharisees, it's helpful to know that they were a small group, but highly influential group of Jewish men. They they really held power over the Jewish people. They were considered the religious and cultural elites of that time amongst the Jewish people. And they believed that two laws came from Moses. One law was the Torah law. That was one law that Moses received on Mount Sinai. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. They also believed that God gave Moses the oral law, which had been passed down with, the Torah law for centuries. And they believed that the oral law was just as binding and as important as the Torah law. Now, the oral law, what it did, it was a lot of detailed regulations on how you were to live out the Torah law in everyday life. And so that's what it was, okay? And the Pharisees believed that if we and the rest of our Jewish people could just follow the Torah law and the oral law closely enough, then God would send a deliverer to rescue us from the Romans. You need to know also, so that's the Pharisees. Simon was a part of this group. You also need to know that the Pharisees' resentment of Jesus was growing. So if you look at the chapters preceding the chapter we're in Luke, you see that the Pharisees, they got upset with Jesus. They were frustrated with him for a couple of reasons. One was that he claimed to forgive sins. And so, because the Pharisees and the rest, they knew that only God could forgive sins because all sins are ultimately against God. When you sin against another person, you're sinning against the God in whose image they are made, right? And so they knew Jesus was equating himself with God. That didn't sit well with them because they didn't believe Jesus was God. Then Jesus also ate with tax collectors and sinners. That was frustrating. That was frustrating to the Pharisees. People who ignored the Torah law and the oral law, Jesus is having meals with them. They did not follow. Also, Jesus and his disciples did not follow the oral law when it came to Sabbath. So they were frustrated with him. Now, I think Simon, unlike most of the Pharisees we read about in the Gospels, was genuinely interested in knowing who Jesus was. I don't think he was trying to trap Jesus like Pharisees, you find them doing in the Gospels. And here's why. 2 reasons. Number 1, Simon shares a meal with Jesus. In that day, in that culture, to share a meal with another person was a sign of unity, solidarity, intimacy, friendship. And so if Simon wasn't genuinely interested in who Jesus was, he would have never shared a meal with him. The second reason I think he was genuinely interested in Jesus is, think about, if my memory is correct, there's only one other time that a Pharisee really pursues Jesus to have a genuine dialogue with him. Can anybody, little Bible quiz, tell me that Pharisee? Nicodemus. When did Nicodemus have that conversation with Jesus? Anybody tell me? At night, under the cloak of darkness. Why? Because the rest of his Pharisees didn't like Jesus. And Nicodemus didn't want to be seen fraternizing with Jesus, right? But here you have Simon has Jesus over for a meal during the day. This took courage on Simon's part. I think he was genuinely interested in Jesus. Now, initially, the meal goes as planned. That is until a woman comes into Simon's house. And just so you know, when you ate a meal back in that day, and I don't know how people didn't choke all the time, you laid down on your left side, your head was towards the table, your feet were away from a table. This is important because we'll see something happening with Jesus' feet, right? We see it. So the sinful woman, we'll see, has access to Jesus' feet because they laid down and they ate with the right hand. I'd be terrified of people choking. All right, let's look at the sinful woman. What do we know about her? Well, we know she is sinful. So she has this reputation. Everybody in the town knows her. And I read a lot of commentaries, and for the most part, there's pretty much a consensus that this woman was a prostitute. She was the town whore, is who this woman was, right? So we know that. The passage says that her sins were many. She was exactly the sort of person who the Pharisees despised. And here, whoa, she is entering a Pharisee's house? This is shocking. And then it just keeps getting more shocking because of what she does. All right, so she comes in and she's sobbing, right? Sobbing. And what she starts doing with her tears is she allows her tears to fall on Jesus' dirty, stinky feet. Jesus had stinky feet. He was fully human. He had stinky feet. She then, because she has no towel, lets her hair down and starts cleaning and then drying Jesus' stinky dirt-soiled feet. And then it just gets more shocking. What does she do next? She starts kissing his feet, right? And then if that wasn't shocking enough, what she does next is just like unthinkable. You see, women at this time, well-to-do women at this time, they had a necklace on it with an alabaster jar. And it was filled of perfume. It was expensive. And in fact, if you look at Matthew 14:5, there's a good chance that this perfume that was hanging around this prostitute's neck was worth a year's salary. Isn't that crazy? A year's salary. Now, how did she get this perfume? How did she have the income? She was a prostitute and must have been doing well as a prostitute. That's my theory. And that perfume was a great tool of her trade, right? In a time where there was no refrigeration, no air conditioning, no deodorant. If you're a prostitute to have perfume, that's going to keep the revenue coming, right? And so, what she does is she takes this extremely expensive perfume and she just uses it to clean and sanitize and to soothe Jesus' feet. This is unthinkable. She broke all the etiquette rules of the day. As a woman, in that time, in that culture, you didn't interrupt a meal that men were having. You didn't enter a Pharisee's house if you were a Gentile, and a very sinful Gentile to boot. You didn't let your hair down in public and start massaging a man's feet and kissing them because that was believed to be like you were coming on to that person. She broke all the etiquette rules. And Simon was disgusted by this lady's ill-mannered behavior in his house. Now, that's the Pharisee, Simon, that's the sinful woman. Let's consider their two different responses to Jesus. Simon did not fulfill his role as a host because in that culture, as a host, when you have an honored guest into your home, you give them a wash basin, water, and a towel so they can clean their feet. Simon didn't do that, and here you have this woman who doesn't have a wash basin or a towel, but is doing it with her tears in her hair. Simon should have given Jesus at least a kiss on his cheek or his hand to welcome him in. Simon doesn't do that. And yet this woman is kissing his feet, kissing Jesus' feet. You need to know that at this time, feet were considered the most unclean part of a person's body. In fact, they were so gross, the only person who could be compelled to wash a Jew's feet was a Gentile slave. Even a Jewish slave could not be compelled to wash another Jew's feet. Interesting. As a welcome, Simon should have kissed them, right? Doesn't do it. She's kissing his feet. Also, Simon should have anointed Jesus' head with olive oil. He doesn't do it. Meanwhile, the prostitute anoints Jesus' head, not with just olive oil, which was inexpensive and really prevalent in that culture, but with perfume that was rare and extremely costly. One commentator says this, and I think it's very ironic. He says, "He who has so carefully followed social conventions in his condemnation of the woman as a sinner has himself failed to follow related conventions." Interesting. All right, now, what's the root of these two responses to Jesus? Why did Simon respond to Jesus in a certain way, and why does this sinful woman respond in another way? And the answer is in the story Jesus told. What's the story? What's the story he told, right? There's two debtors. They owe money to a money lender. One owes 50 denarii. Another one owes 500 denarii. 1 denarii is equal to a day's wages. So one lender owes about a month and a half worth of work wages. The other lender owes like a year and a half worth of wages, right? They both don't have money to pay the lender back. The lender forgives both of their debts. And so Jesus asked Simon, well, which lender do you think, or which debtor loved the lender more? And Simon answers correctly. He said the one who was forgiven the bigger debt. And the next thing Jesus did is he pointed to the sinful woman. And he is going to use the sinful woman as an object lesson. He says, Simon, looky here, basically. This woman, from the time, I came in, she couldn't stop kissing my feet, and she's cleaning my feet with her hair and her tears. And you haven't, done the things that you should have done as a host. And the point he was making by telling the story and then using the woman as an object lesson is he was saying to Simon, guess what, Simon? She's the one in the story that owed the 500 denarii, and I am the money lender that has forgiven her debt. And as a result, she's overwhelmed with gratitude. She's overwhelmed with gratitude. And what he is saying to Simon, if you read between the lines, the statement he is making to Simon is he's saying to Simon, look, Simon, the reason your response to me was so cold is because you haven't come to terms with who I am, your brokenness, and my offer of grace. If you continue to ignore these truths, your ability to love God, others, and even life itself will be stunted. It will be deficient. That's what he's saying to Simon. Which is interesting, too, that Jesus told this story to Simon because his story, this is the first miracle, proves that Jesus was a prophet. Because it proved that he was reading Simon's mind and reading his heart. It's kind of cool. Now, what does this mean for us today? This is what I think, there's so many things we can observe and apply to our lives today, but let me just offer, 4 things. Here's the first one. We all choose how we view Jesus. What is your view of Jesus? Simon had one view of Jesus, the sinful woman had another view of Jesus, and it led to different responses. What is your view of Jesus? Some people today view Jesus as merely a legend, like he's made up, he never existed. Maybe you hold that view. Some people view Jesus as like a sage who dispensed wisdom. And I think Simon was kind of approaching Jesus that way, that, maybe he's a prophet, and then he's thinking he's not a prophet, but maybe there's some advice that he can give that will help me supplement my life in some way to make it a bit better. Some people today approach Jesus that way. Some people view Jesus as like a madman, right? A lunatic, a person who thought he was God and he was not, delusional, right? If you have taken any of these views, or if you know any person that has taken these views, I beg you to reconsider. Here's why. There's way too much historical evidence to believe Jesus was just a legend and didn't exist. Like, no, like, scholar that's worth anything would say that. Even those who don't believe Jesus was the Son of God would say that. No historian. If you write Jesus off as just a sage or a prophet, there's problems there, though, because you don't believe he's God and he claimed to be God, and so Jesus is a liar. And if he's a liar, why would you listen to any of his advice? That doesn't make sense. And how would you pick what is right from his teachings? If you just ignore Jesus, and because you're not taking time to look into him, that's silly to do too, because there's no person in the history of the world that has influenced the world more than Jesus. And his teaching has too many implications for your life now and after death, and his promises are too good if what he taught is true, and if he really was who he said he was, to just ignore and write off without an honest, thorough investigation. We must all choose our view of Jesus. How do you view him? Liar, lunatic, or Lord? Look, we all have to, here's the next takeaway here, we all have to choose how we view ourselves. Simon had an overinflated view of himself. He did. The big point here is that, and the reason Jesus approached him the way he did and told the story that he told to Simon was to show Simon not that he isn't a great sinner in need of great forgiveness, but to show him that he is a great sinner, but unlike the sinful woman, he doesn't see it. He doesn't view himself that way. He doesn't realize how great of a sinner he is. And as a result, Simon was struggling to see his need for Jesus beyond maybe just a little bit of some good advice. Look, building your identity, and this is what he was doing, Simon was doing, on being moral and good, and so many people in the church do this, is a hotbed. It creates a hotbed in your heart for self-righteousness and pride. Now, the sinful woman, how does she view herself? It is highly likely that she had a deflated view of herself. That she saw herself so broken, so far gone, so beyond help and forgiveness. If there's a God, she had no chance. Some of you here today view yourself that way also. What is your view of yourself? Is it more like a Simon, or is it more like the sinful woman? What do legalistic Simons need? What do they need? This is what they need. They need to realize that they're not as good at keeping the rules as they think they are. Look at even how Simon hosted Jesus. He wasn't even a good host to a guest. He is not nearly as righteous as he thinks he is, but he can't see it. That's what they need to be able to see. They need to see their pride and self-righteousness when they actually do follow the rules that creeps into their soul and causes them to look down their nose at other people. And they need to see Jesus' grace for self-righteous sinners that repent. What does the licentious, sinful women and men of the world, what do they need? Well, they need to see that them trying to find the good life in sensory experiences, in pleasure, in things like sex and money and power is a dead end. It does not ultimately satisfy. It does not quench the soul thirst that we have. And because usually, a lot of the times, they're aware of their brokenness, they also need to be able to see that, as one person has said, there's more grace and forgiveness in Jesus' little finger than there is in sin in the vilest, than there is sin in the vilest sinner who repents. There's more grace and forgiveness in Jesus' little finger than there is sin in the vilest sinner who repents. How do you view yourself? How do you view yourself? All right, here's the third application point. Your view of yourself in Jesus determines your response to him. If you view Jesus as a legend, or if you view him as a madman, you're going to have certain responses to him. If you view him as a potential prophet or sage, like Simon was initially doing it, you might take some of his advice. You're going to have a certain response to him. But if you view yourself as the way the sinful woman eventually did, that she was extremely broken, and yet she viewed Jesus as God in the flesh who had the authority to forgive her sins and actually wanted to, if you view yourself and Jesus that way, you're going to have the response of the sinful woman. What was her response? She wept tears of joy and gratitude for Jesus' grace. She's delighting in worshiping Jesus. She's gratefully giving over her wealth and possessions to Jesus. And in doing that, she's saying, I'm done with that career. My new identity is based on this man who is God and who has forgiven me. You gratefully walk away from any vocation that is not God glorifying or isn't in alignment with the purposes he has for you. And what did Jesus tell her to go in? Peace. Which literally the Greek is go into peace, which means you're starting an adventure of peace. Peace that you are right with God and that he is with you and for you. And so what about you? What is your response to Jesus? How do you know if your response is more like Simon or more like the sinful woman? This is how you know. This is how you know. Have you ever wept over what Jesus has done for you? Have you ever been moved to tears with the enormous grace that Jesus has extended to you? Despite all your ugliness, all your rebellion, all your brokenness, have you ever been moved to tears? Do you delight in worshiping Jesus? Or are you dragged here every Sunday? Are you ashamed of your faith in public? This sinful woman, she was unashamed. She had met the man that had changed everything for her, and she didn't care what people thought. How about you? Are you stingy with your money and possessions? Or are you looking to give more away, more this year than last year, more away? Do you ever experience a peace that passes understanding, that just doesn't make sense? This is how you know. And there is one more very important thing that helps you discern whether grace has infected your heart. And here it is. Is your love for people increasing? And here's the kicker. For specific groups of people. Check this out. Look, if your love for people that look like you, believe like you, walk like you, talk like you is increasing, whoopee. Big deal. The true test is your love for people that don't look like you, don't think like you, don't believe like you, increasing? You see, Jesus, you have Simon the Pharisee. The Pharisees are already opposing Jesus. And do you see how he just just so beautifully responds to Simon with grace and truth? An enemy? Look, how do you view people that think differently than you? How do you view those Democrats? Those liberals? Do you look at them with self-righteousness and pride and arrogance that you're so glad you're not like those sinners? With this disdain? What about those Republicans, those conservatives? Can't believe them. So glad I'm not like those sinners. You feel all prideful and right and self-righteous, and you look at them with disdain. How about those woke people? It's a big buzzword. What's woke culture? Do you look at people who identify as that with disdain, self-righteousness, and pride? What about the people who aren't woke enough? Do you look at them self-righteously and prideful that you're not unwoke with disdain? So how are you loving the people who are different than you, who think differently than you? That's the test. If grace has infected your heart, that's how you know. It's not if you're loving people who are easy to love. And then, here's the other test, the other category. How are you loving people that have made a lot of bad choices in life? Do you look at them and, how could they be doing that? Those idiots with a bunch of self-righteous pride that you're not like those sinners, disdain. Jesus said in Luke 6:32 through 36, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked, people like you. Be merciful, just as the Father is merciful. Look, the reason why Christians have lost so much influence in the world is because our love is no different than the people in the world. And the antidote to that is a real experience and understanding of Jesus' amazing grace. Do you think the sinful woman had trouble loving people that were broken? No. Do you think she had trouble forgiving people that hurt her or hurt others? No. Do you think she was walking around with self-righteousness and pride and disdain for certain people groups? No. Why? Back to our main point. Your ability to love is directly correlated to the grace you believe you've received, in the forgiveness you've received? How do you know that you are responding to Jesus like the sinful woman? You know, by your devotion to Jesus and your love for people who are hard to love. Look, I want this church to be a church that is different in how we love. It's the only hope that we have, that anybody in Massillon is going to take it seriously. Let's be those people. Let's pray. Lord, I confess that I often feel disdain, and I'm sure a bit of self-righteousness and pride when I don't feel like Christians are getting this, and they should. My heart needs to be cleansed. And I'm sure there's a number of people here that realize, as you minister your word to us, and as you, Holy Spirit, operate in this room, that they have looked at a lot of people with disdain and self-righteousness and pride too. Lord, we need you through your word and by the power of the Holy Spirit to make what you have done for us so beautiful to us that we can't help but extend the grace and truth.
Thank you for listening to today's teaching. Make sure to click subscribe for the latest sermons. You can find more information about Abundant Life Christian Fellowship and our upcoming events by going to alcfohio.org. Again, that's alcfohio.org. You can also stay connected with us on Facebook and YouTube. We hope you have a great day.